These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. Men with rifles line up by a scarred wall beside a rough wooden frame, a setup that looks like an improvised prison yard. This image is often reposted as Civil War Russia propaganda. Men in bulky cork life vests crowd the deck while ropes stretch overhead, showing what early sea safety gear really looked like. Often linked to the SS Vestris emergency in 1928, this sharp glass negative freezes the split second a lifeboat launch turns into pure hurry. A silver Porsche 550 Spyder rolls down a wide highway with James Dean at the wheel, captured in a grainy, real-life moment. Often claimed to be his last photo, it was taken on September 30th, 1955, shortly before that car became a worldwide legend. This photo is often cited as one of the earliest photobombs, with a smiling regime insider popping up behind a leader signing papers. Because official images were usually tightly controlled, this rare background grin feels oddly modern. In 1986, a major surf event packed Huntington Beach, while towering black clouds rose behind the shoreline. The unreal mix of summer fun and a dark sky made this image famous for showing how fast a celebration can flip. In 1988, photographer Don Hallisey captured a rare New York City scene where a mounted police officer used a horse for speed and a high view on a busy street. Horse patrols are still used because they can weave through traffic, and their height helps officers spot problems far away. This 1904 portrait shows the telltale pockmarks of smallpox, a virus that once pushed cities into strict quarantine and mass vaccination. Smallpox became the first human disease fully wiped out worldwide, officially declared gone in 1980 by the World Health Organization. Early September 1982, Mark Colthurst poses on the bow of a boat named the Investor, a calm frame that feels like a warning in hindsight. Later that month, reports say the boat vanished overnight in thick fog and was found badly damaged, with everyone on board missing. In 1901, temperance activist Carrie Nation posed with the small hatchet she became famous for using to smash saloons during anti-alcohol raids. She was arrested many times, and her hatchet image was so iconic that it turned into a moneymaker through photos, pins. On April 19, 1952, 19-year-old usher Margaret Lewis stunned Piccadilly by walking to work in a bikini and high heels as crowds stopped to stare. Bikinis were still new and widely seen as shocking. In early 1950s, Britain. On August 13, 1972, 67-year-old high-wire star Karl Wallenda crossed 140 feet above the field between games in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He even did a headstand halfway and earned $3,000. In February 1954, Marilyn Monroe visited United States troops in Korea and performed several shows to lift morale in the freezing outdoors. This color Kodachrome moment is rare because most famous Monroe images are studio polished. In the late 1950s, the Piasecki VZ-8 Air Jeep was a real flying Jeep that used two huge ducted fans to lift off and land straight down. It was so loud and hard to control that tests stayed low to the ground, and the idea quietly faded before it could replace trucks. In the early 1900s, Scotland Yard kept identity records in huge wall files, with every folder sorted by hand and pulled in seconds by trained clerks. Fingerprints were filed by pattern groups like loops and whorls, letting detectives match a print long before any computer search. In 1913 at Marseille, the French ship SS Kangaroo carried a full submarine on its deck like oversized cargo. Built in 1912, it was an early heavy-lift idea, moving naval tech across oceans years before modern transport ships made it normal. On March 29, 1881, southern Minnesota snowdrifts rose higher than locomotives, turning the rail line into a tunnel of ice. Crews sometimes had to cut through drifts for miles to reopen routes, showing how winter could stop a whole region in the steam age. In 1943, Soviet crews trained with an extra-large shoulder device built to stop tanks trying to track low aircraft. It weighed about 17 kilograms and kicked with huge force, so two-person teams drilled fast loading and balance to keep it steady. Near Panama City in 1990, airborne troops practiced mass jumps, turning the sky into a chain of parachutes over green farmland. Most training jumps use a static line that opens the canopy in seconds at low height, leaving almost no time to fix mistakes. Circa 1953, women packed jiu-jitsu classes that taught how to use balance and leverage to control a bigger person without relying on strength. This trend grew with new city life and women's clubs, turning a once exotic Japanese art into practical, everyday, personal safety training. Near Van in 1916, Armenian volunteers pose in a trench, turning a chaotic moment into a rare close-up of history. Van is a fortress city on Lake Van that changed rulers for centuries, and most people in this frame remain unnamed today. In 1939, in Kutno, Poland, a woman smiles behind a wire barrier during an occupation, a tiny act of calm captured in a tense street scene. Color photos from this time were rare because early color film was costly and fragile, so this frame feels like history suddenly turning real. On September 23, 1952, Jersey Joe Walcott faced Rocky Marciano in Philadelphia, a title fight that put an older era against the sport's new power style. Walcott was about 38 when he won the heavyweight crown, still one of the oldest champions in boxing history. In 1943, an occupation-era French paramilitary group fills a hall, frozen in a rigid raised arm gesture meant to signal loyalty to a foreign ruling power. The unit was created that year under the Vichy government, led by Joseph Darnan. Around 1946, Edna Rivers, a close friend of Abby Stockton, poses in a weight room with a bar loaded to the edges. At about 150 pounds, she was reported to lift 500 pounds, showing early women were already rewriting strength limits. In 1938, Italian farm workers arrived by train in Germany through state labor deals that moved thousands across borders for seasonal work. The waving flags show how jobs and travel were staged for propaganda, turning a simple arrival into a public message. On May 10, 1910, this butcher shop displayed whole carcasses in the open because hanging meat improved cooling and let buyers judge freshness by sight. Before modern refrigeration and wrapped cuts, storefronts like this worked as living billboards and quality proofs at the same time. In 1966, a massive fuel cloud erupts near patrol soldiers in South Vietnam, caught in rare color. The thickened fuel used in these attacks was made to stick and keep burning, and images like this helped fuel worldwide outrage and later limits on similar weapons. On November 27, 1925, the United States Army 2nd Infantry Division at Fort Sam Houston formed a giant human insignia so the unit patch could be seen from above. These formations were early photo stunts made for high-vantage cameras. On December 17, 1925, the Embry-Riddle Company was founded in Cincinnati, Ohio, starting as an aircraft sales and service business. That small start later grew into Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, one of the world's best-known flight and aerospace schools. On December 2, 1925, staff covered Tottenham's pitch with about 3,000 straw bales to stop frost from hardening the turf before the match. The straw worked like insulation, trapping ground heat overnight, so the surface could be cleared and still playable by kickoff. On December 12, 1925, a Buick sales and service building used its roof as a full parking deck, stacking cars above the city street. Rooftop parking was an early answer to the car boom, when downtown blocks filled faster than garages could be built. In 1925, newspapers hyped the Autogiro, Juan de la Tierra's rotorcraft that could land slower and safer than most airplanes of the day. Its key trick was hinged rotor blades that balanced lift, a simple idea that helped open the door to practical rotor flight. A film actor tries on a practical effects mask that transforms his face into something chilling up close. The look was built with hand-sculpted latex pieces and simple lighting tricks, proving you can scare an audience without any computer effects. Circa 1910, a man poses with a wheelbarrow holding a giant face prop, making the scene look impossible at first glance. Early photographers used forced perspective and cut-and-paste prints to fool the eye long before digital editing. In 1947, circus performer Sate Layton posed as the Snake Woman for Colbros Promotions, turning a simple photo into a dare. These acts usually used calm, non-venomous snakes and careful handling to keep the show safe, while making it look wild. Photographer Nadar captured one of the first underground images in the Paris catacombs by bringing his own light into total darkness. Using magnesium flash powder, he cut an exposure from about 1 day to around 20 minutes, making underground photography finally possible. 1900 in Tonopah, Nevada, a miner built a cabin from barrels, a quick fix when the boomtown grew faster than lumber could arrive. In desert mining camps, wood was so scarce that people turned shipping crates, tin, and barrels into full homes overnight. Around 1910 to 1914, Crow's Nest Pass lumber workers in Bull River, British Columbia, stand on a massive log jam made during a log drive. Before trucks and paved roads, mills floated huge piles of timber downstream, and crews used long pike poles to break jams and keep the river moving. In 1961, the chimpanzee Ham got an apple after a space mission, still strapped into a custom seat with sensors. He was trained to press levers on cue, and his performance helped prove that a person could do simple work during near weightlessness. In the Soviet Union in 1983, Komsomol Patrol volunteers often watched parks at night and confronted teenagers breaking public order rules. These voluntary squads acted like extra eyes for the police, and a single warning could follow someone through school or work paperwork. Around 1919 in France, a teenage Walt Disney served as a Red Cross ambulance driver after the First World War, long before he became a studio founder. He was too young to enlist as a soldier, so he joined the Red Cross instead and even drew cartoons on the vehicle's side. On January 1, 1960, test pilot Neil Armstrong stands beside an experimental rocket plane in a shiny heat, reflecting suit built for extreme speed. Less than a decade later, he would step onto the moon in 1969. After serving 14 years for a bank crime, John Wojtowicz later worked at the same bank as a security guard and posed outside wearing a shirt that bragged about his past. His 1972 case later inspired the movie Dog Day Afternoon, turning a real headline into film history. This is the World War II-era Fat Man nuclear device, a plutonium implosion design that used precisely shaped explosive lenses to squeeze its core evenly. It weighed about 10,000 pounds, and its implosion layout became the blueprint for many later nuclear designs. In the 1940s at Coney Island, the Barrel of Love spun a giant wooden cylinder so the floor tilted and couples slid into each other. It was a pure physics trick. The faster the barrel turned, the stronger the push against the wall, making balance feel impossible. In 1937, Prague's social welfare department ran a giant paper database with endless index drawers covering the walls. Sliding rails and lifts moved case files across the room so clerks could find a person's record in minutes, like a search engine long before computers. Poland, 1946. Officials recover Leonardo da Vinci's Lady with an ermine after years of hiding and movement across Europe. Painted around 1490, it likely shows Cecilia Gallerani, and the white ermine was a clever symbol tied to her powerful patron. In 1925, Austrian circus strongwoman Katie Sanduina lifts a grown man over her head with one arm, turning a person into a weight. She earned her name after beating famous strongman Eugen Sandow in a lifting contest, and Sanduina was created as the female version of his name. On January 10, 1964, a Detroit Autorama crowd saw a concept car with a clear bubble canopy and a lounge-like interior that looked more like a spaceship than a sedan. Many show cars of this era were built as rolling ads, designed to sell a future feeling rather than a real production model. In 1967, engineers built the Transphibian Tactical Crusher, a 95-ton experiment meant to roll through jungle and make a passable path. Its 3 hollow steel drums were about 3.7 meters wide and also helped it float, so it was part vehicle and part moving raft. During the First World War, a British seaplane pilot released a carrier pigeon because radios were heavy, unreliable, and easy to intercept. Trained pigeons could fly back to their home loft at around 60 miles per hour, carrying tiny coded notes in a small tube. On November 1, 1973, a Tokyo supermarket saw a crush of shoppers racing for toilet paper during the oil shock panic. Even though paper shortage was mostly a rumor, fear spread fast, and stores had to bring in staff and police to control the crowds. In 1949, at the University of Michigan, researchers ran alcohol studies by testing controlled doses and tracking effects in real time. Self-experiments were more common then, long before modern ethics boards required strict review and independent oversight. In the 1950s in Bloomington, Indiana, workers assembled RCA Victor televisions on a line, wiring parts by hand under rows of task lights. Early sets were packed with hot vacuum tubes, so factories focused on careful soldering and fast testing to catch failures before the TV left the plant. This is often shared as a 1950s photo of a future bodybuilding and movie icon as a schoolboy in rural Austria. Post-war Austria was still rebuilding then, and many families lived with strict budgets and simple routines that shaped hard discipline early. This historic Dempsey versus Tunney fight drew one of boxing's biggest ever crowds, packing the stadium like a living ocean under harsh floodlights. In the pre-television era, radio broadcasts turned nights like this into national events, with gate money and headlines setting records. In July 1969, President Richard Nixon talked to the Apollo 11 crew through the window of the mobile quarantine facility on the aircraft carrier Hornet. The room was a modified Airstream trailer, and the crew stayed isolated for 21 days from launch while doctors watched for any unknown moon germs. In 1915, an Inuit family stands by a summer tent home built for quick moves during the hunting season. The cover was often made from animal skins stretched over poles, light enough to carry but tight enough to block wind and rain. Santa Monica, 1932. Ralph Madsen, 2.29 meters tall, tips his hat to young Barbara Carlson like a walking skyscraper. People that tall often needed custom shoes and doorways, and many were booked for traveling shows because crowds could not believe the scale in person. Italy, 1953. Egypt's exiled King Farouk I strolls poolside, far from the palaces he once ruled. He was removed in 1952, and exile turned him into a tabloid figure, watched for every detail of his new life. Toronto, 1914. Women in long skirts practice hitting paper targets outdoors as the First World War begins. Before Canada introduced conscription in 1917, many civilians joined volunteer drill and first aid groups to feel prepared. Blue jeans started as tough miner pants, cut from denim and built to survive constant wear. In 1873, Levi Strauss and Jacob Davis patented copper rivets, turning a work fix into the most copied clothing design on Earth. In March 1938 in Walmer, Kent, 70-year-old Elizabeth Arnold works as England's only known woman farrier, fitting a shoe on a huge draft horse at a centuries-old forge. Shoeing needs the hoof trimmed flat and the hot iron shape to match, so one perfect fit can save the animal's legs for months. Apollo 11, in 1969, captured this close view of moon dust, where every boot print stayed sharp because there is no wind or rain to erase it. The soil is made of tiny jagged rock grains from endless impacts, so it clings to gear and scratches surfaces like sandpaper. In Paris in 1924, Ohio's William D. Hart Hubbard won the long jump and became the first black athlete to take an individual gold medal at the Olympic Games. He later captained the United States track team. Two uniformed airmen pause in Venice as pigeons flood the square, a tourist-like moment during World War II. St. Mark's Square became so famous for feeding pigeons that the city later restricted it to protect the historic stone buildings. January 1942 in Culm. Troops sprint past shattered buildings during the winter encirclement, later called the Culm Pocket. Aircraft brought supplies by air in brutal weather, an early example of resupply keeping an isolated force in place. A uniformed man lies in tall grass, pointing toward a house swallowed by thick smoke in an undated photo. With no place or year, it feels like a missing page mystery where the camera kept the moment, but not the story. In July 1931 in Brooklyn, a streetcar jumped the rails at Nostrand and Putnam and slammed into a corner shop. Early streetcars could derail on tight turns or slippery rails, so whole cities later redesigned track curves and braking rules to cut crashes. On March 18, 1931, state highway police were sent to Stateville Prison in Joliet, Illinois, after a mass disturbance involving about 1,500 inmates. The wrecked yard shows how quickly a tightly controlled system can snap, forcing outside forces to step in. In 1911, a 16-ton Titanic anchor left N. Hingley and Sons in Netherton on a huge horse team, turning a factory shipment into a street parade. The anchor was so big it needed a special wagon and dozens of horses, showing how shipbuilding pushed the limits of land transport too. On August 1, 1943, a consolidated Liberator Model B-24 flies low through thick smoke over the oil refineries of Ploiesti, Romania, during Operation Tidal Wave. The plan used very low altitude to avoid radar, but refinery towers. In 1910, the United States-Mexico border at Nogales was marked by simple stone posts you could walk around in seconds. The line later turned into fences and checkpoints, showing how a quiet street corner became a hard border over time. In 1989, Leningrad, a special tram sprayed water on hot streets to cool the asphalt and knock down dust. Cities used these washing trams because the rail network already covered the main roads, turning public transport into a moving street cleaner. In 1906, San Francisco City Hall stands shattered after the Great Earthquake, its huge dome turned into a hollow shell. The building was later replaced, and the disaster pushed the city to rethink construction methods for seismic risk. On April 13, 1982, Argentine soldiers browsed postcards in Stanley just days after the landing, creating a surreal mix of war and tourism. Postcards were a quick way to prove I was here, so even in tense moments, people grabbed small paper souvenirs. In 1956 in New York, officers carried a seized device from the Paramount Theater on a long pole to keep it far from their bodies. The 16-year case was cracked by matching taunting letters and a psychiatrist's profile that led to George Metesky. A horse-drawn caravan crosses open grassland, showing how everyday travel once depended on animal power and simple wooden engineering. These carts could haul food, bedding, and tools for days, and every part was made to be fixed on the road with basic handwork. This is Alexander Ilyich Ulyanov, Lenin's older brother, photographed in the 1880s before his case shook Imperial Russia. After an assassination plot against Tsar Alexander III, he was executed in 1887 at age 21, a turning point that deeply shaped Lenin's path. In 1913, this rare color-tinted view shows a Mongolian prison yard where heavy chains were used as everyday restraint. The bright paint makes the scene feel almost modern, which is why it hits so hard despite being over a century old. In 1990 on Friedrichstrasse, an East German Volkspolizei patrol car meets a West Berlin motorcycle officer as two systems briefly worked side by side after the wall fell. The vehicles tell the story in one glance, a Lada sedan beside a BMW bike, like a live handoff between eras. In 1974 in Fullwood, Preston, this futuristic classroom was built from molded plastic panels and shaped with early computer design tools. It still gets used because the faceted shell is light, strong, and quick to repair by swapping panels like parts. On November 7, 1927, marchers crossed a muddy red square for the anniversary parade, with the early wooden Lenin mausoleum visible on the left. That temporary structure was later replaced by the stone version, but this photo freezes the brief in-between Moscow that most people never see. In 1924, President Calvin Coolidge stands on his Vermont farm as everyday chores and family life continue around him. He was famous for saving words, and the contrast of a quiet farm scene with a sitting president makes this photo feel oddly intimate. In the 1940s, nationalist Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek walks with Dai Li, the powerful head of the Military Statistics Bureau. Dai built a vast intelligence network from the wartime capital Chongqing, making loyalty and secrecy a daily currency in Chinese politics. Launched in 1919, HMS Hermes was among the first aircraft carriers designed from the keel up, built around a flat flight deck and early gear to launch and recover planes. Its layout helped prove that a sea runway could project air power far beyond the coast. In the 1920s in Jinan, China, Zhang Zongchang's personal guard posed for a formal group photo during the chaotic warlord era. Zhang was nicknamed the Dog-Meat General, and his sudden rise showed how whole provinces could change hands through loyalty, money, and fear. In 1979 in Esteli, Nicaragua, an old M4 Sherman-era armored vehicle rolls through city streets, showing how Second World War hardware stayed in service for decades. The Sherman was built in the 1940s, yet it still appeared in later conflicts because it was simple to fix. On January 1, 1979 in Beirut, Fatah supporters marched with flags, turning a city street into a political stage. Lebanon's Civil War era made Beirut a hub for rival groups, so rallies like this were as much about territory and visibility as speeches. On March 27, 1942, a Japanese-American farmer holds papers to lease his land before wartime relocation in the United States. Over 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry were uprooted. September 1939 in Brest-Litovsk, German and Soviet troops shake hands during a staged handover ceremony. Their commanders Heinz Guderian and Semyon Krivoshein even coordinated a joint parade, a rare moment of cooperation just days after Poland was split. During the Venezuelan crisis of 1902 to 1903, President Cipriano Castro meets with his war cabinet as foreign navies blockaded the country over unpaid debts. The standoff ended with international arbitration, a key early test of the idea that debt disputes could be settled by courts instead of cannons. In Prague in 1910, Christmas tree sellers tried to fix prices, but shoppers refused, leaving entire forests of unsold furs on the streets by Christmas Eve. It is a perfect real-world lesson. When prices jump too high, even holiday tradition can hit a hard limit. In 1939, a Polish radio hobbyist sits at a home-built shortwave station with the SP prefix, the start of Poland's national call signs. Before the internet, setups like this could bounce signals hundreds or even thousands of miles using the ionosphere and a few hot vacuum tubes. Ernesto Che Guevara poses in the Congo in 1965, far from his better-known campaigns in the Americas. This mission ended in failure, and his field notes later shaped how many people understood his global revolution plans. Men take cover at a street corner in Tbilisi during Georgia's internal power struggle in 1991 to 1992. The crisis came just after the country left the Soviet Union, and it shaped Georgia's early post-independence politics. A soldier runs through shattered buildings in Hue, Vietnam, during the intense fighting of 1968. This image captures close-range street combat, where a single throw could decide the next doorway. A U.S. Army private struggles to get a mule team moving after a supply wagon sinks into a muddy road in France, September 13, 1918. In World War I, transport bottlenecks like this could stall an entire column because every unit behind it depended on the same narrow route. British SAS medics treat an Omani villager during the Dhofar conflict in Oman, January 1970. Small clinic moments like this were used to build trust in remote mountain villages where help could be days away. Etta Mussolini and Galeazzo Ciano pose in formal wear at Villa Torlonia in Rome. Ciano later kept detailed diaries that became a major record of how Italy was run in the 1930s. Milan Stojadinovic places a cornerstone for the new Faculty of Law building in Belgrade in 1937. The staged crowd and flags show how public education projects were used as big national symbols in the interwar years. A dentist uses a portable drill on a young girl in the early 1900s, captured on a glass plate, negative. Many drills then were powered by a foot pedal, and visits often happened without modern numbing medicine. Jane Mansfield smiles beside her mother, Vera Jeffrey, in the mid-1950s. These publicity-style photos helped turn actors into household names as fan magazines exploded in the post-war boom. Two formerly enslaved men pose after reaching a Union camp in 1862. Photographs like this became rare proof of people who fled bondage and started over under Union protection. A lone homesteader stands by his small house on the Texas plains near the Rabbit Ear Mountains in the 19th century. His postcard ad asked for a kind wife and promised a good homestead and bright prospects, showing how matchmaking once traveled by mail. Canadian troops weighed onto the Normandy shore in France in July 1944, with landing ships waiting offshore. Shot on Kodachrome color film, it preserves rare true-to-life tones from an era when most war images were still black and white. Inside a seafood cannery in Bluffton, South Carolina, a young oyster shucker works beside adults in 1913. Photographer Louis Wicks Hine used images like this to expose child labor and push for stronger workplace laws. An aerial view shows the rectangular earthworks and dig trenches of Sarkel, a Khazar fortress uncovered in the 1930s. Built in the 9th century to guard a key river crossing, its sharp geometric plan reveals how steppe empires engineered strong border posts. A circus acrobat flexes her powerful back in the 1940s. Stage lights and a feathered headpiece turn pure strength into a glamorous act, decades before modern fitness culture. Women hand in enlistment papers to join the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps in 1943. The WAAC opened thousands of new jobs for women and changed military life in the United States. Members of the Somali National Movement pose in southern Somaliland in the late 1980s. The movement later helped drive Somaliland's Declaration of Independence in 1991. In the 1960s and 1970s, South Korean border posts like this watched a thin ridge facing the Korean demilitarized zone. The zone is about 4 kilometers wide, and the long, quiet strip became a safe home for rare cranes and other wildlife. This 1944 photo shows a German officer later hunted for crimes from World War II. Many men like him avoided arrest by using false papers, changing uniforms, and escaping through secret routes into South America. On October 25, 1934, hundreds of insurance employees filled a Chandelier ballroom and turned a work club night into a full costume spectacle during the Great Depression. A single bright flash froze the entire crowd in one sharp moment, back when group photos were hard and film was precious. This arch in Brest-Litovsk on September 22, 1939, showed German and Soviet symbols side by side during a joint parade. It marked the city handover after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact split Poland, a chilling snapshot of two rivals acting like partners. In 1915 in Galicia, an Austro-Hungarian officer posed with the everyday load he carried on the Eastern Front. His belt shows field glasses, a map case, and bulky supply pouches, and Galicia later became parts of modern Poland and Ukraine. In May 1945, teenage recruits from the Volkssturm were taken prisoner after the Battle of Berlin. Some were as young as 13, pulled from school into last-minute units when Germany ran out of trained troops. In 1941, captured Soviet soldiers reached through barbed wire for food in a German prisoner of war camp. Germany seized over 3 million Soviet troops in the first months of Operation Barbarossa, and the camp system was overwhelmed almost overnight. On June 22, 1941, Moscow civilians packed around a street radio to hear that German forces had begun a sudden eastern offensive. That morning opened Operation Barbarossa, a front nearly 2,900 kilometers long that reshaped the next 4 years of Europe. In April 1975, former South Vietnamese leader Nguyen Cao Khai walked onto the United States Navy aircraft carrier Midway during the last evacuation from Saigon. Midway became a floating landing strip as helicopters and small planes brought in thousands during Operation Frequent Wind. In 1943, at a train station, a Soviet teenager is shown cleaning the boots of a wounded German soldier, a rare and uneasy wartime moment. As the Eastern Front shifted after Stalingrad, rail hubs became chaotic crossroads where prisoners, refugees, and the injured passed within arm's reach. In July 1953, Fidel Castro sits in a Cuban jail after the Moncada Barracks uprising. He defended himself in court with the speech later titled, "History Will Absolve Me," received a 15-year sentence, and was released in an amnesty in 1955. In 1943, modernist painter Jacob Lawrence served aboard the USS Sea Cloud, and his officers made painting part of his official duties. The sketches he made on the ship grew into his famous war series, showing daily life at sea with bold, simple shapes. In September 1939, a Polish child sits among the shattered streets of Warsaw after German air raids. Within weeks, the city was under occupation, and the rubble became the first stage of a long underground struggle. In 1918, dock crews load heavy steel plates from Pittsburgh mills onto a steamship, turning river transport into an extension of the factory floor. This steel-fed wartime production and the skyscraper boom, with Carnegie's system moving ore in and finished metal out at industrial speed. In June 1950, ironworkers balance on a high beam while raising the U.S. Steel Mellon Building at 525 William Penn Place in downtown Pittsburgh. The risky rope and rivets you see helped lift a steel-frame skyline in days, with the courthouse and Frick Building watching from below. This is the last known photo of American photojournalists Sean Flynn and Dana Stone smiling on motorcycles in 1970. They rode from Vietnam into Cambodia to record a sudden political takeover, then vanished on the road, and their fate is still unknown. Biologist Jewel Plummer Cobb focused on melanoma, one of the hardest skin cancers, and mapped how pigment cells grow and change under stress. Her research helped push cancer treatment forward, and she later became president of California State University, Fullerton, at age 57. In December 1962, Atlanta residents protested the Peyton Road barricade, a wall built to block traffic and split nearby neighborhoods. The barrier became a national symbol of how a simple street closure could enforce segregation without a single law being written. In December 1972, United States B-52 bombers flew a massive around-the-clock air operation over Hanoi and Haiphong, known as Operation Linebacker 2. It pushed North Vietnam back to the Paris negotiations and helped lead to the January 1973 peace agreement. In 1918, the United States Army built long wooden barracks on the Bradley campus in Peoria, turning a school field into a training site almost overnight. World War I mobilization spread into college towns, linking classrooms to factories as Illinois fed the war effort with skilled labor and machines. On April 5, 1951, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg faced sentencing in a United States courtroom after being convicted of passing nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union. Their case became a global flashpoint about fear, evidence, and justice in the early Cold War. During the 1960s in rural Vietnam, patrols moved through thatched villages, searching for hidden supply caches and local armed groups. Families were often gathered for fast identity checks, turning a quiet footpath into a sudden checkpoint in minutes. Amelie Bies was one of the first women in Germany to earn a pilot license, and she also worked as an aircraft engineer when aviation was still brand new. At Berlin's Johannisthal airfield, pioneers like her tested fragile early planes that could fail from one snapped wire or weak bolt. On December 20, 1925, a fire in a powder store at the United Verde Copper Company in Jerome, Arizona, shook the town and shattered windows. People felt it about 35 miles away and saw an 800-foot black smoke column, yet no one was seriously hurt, and the lost supplies were valued near $40,000. In December 1925, the new San Jose club in the Cuban Winter League folded mid-season after a bad start and money troubles. Cuban Winter Ball was already a major talent pipeline, and teams lived or died on gate receipts from a few crowded nights. On December 21, 1925, a crowd gathered at the Christina Development Company field office in Polk County, Florida, where a sign advertised "A city for colored people and land for sale." It captures a little-known push to build black-led towns in the Jim Crow era, using land ownership as a shield and a path to power. At 2 in the morning on December 7, 1925, a fire tore through Central Michigan Normal School in Mount Pleasant and wiped out its main building and library. Losses were estimated near $500,000, yet the school kept classes running while pushing the state to rebuild. On December 1, 1925, Benito Mussolini's government in Italy made the raised arm salute an official public gesture. It was sold as a link to ancient Rome, but it was a modern stage tool that turned crowds into one moving symbol of loyalty. On December 6, 1925, a fire tore through Seattle's sanitary public market, filling the upper floors with smoke. Firefighters climbed up to rescue Mrs. E.F. Elmore and her nephew Denzel Cutler after both exits were blocked, and damage was estimated near $25,000. Dat Sola Lee, a Washoe master basket weaver, died in Carson City, Nevada on December 6, 1925, after years of illness. Her baskets could sell for about $1,000 then, and she was buried with one of her last pieces. On December 17, 1925, Argentine heavyweight Luis Angel Firpo was set to sign for a Buenos Aires rematch with Italy's Erminio Spalla. Firpo had knocked Spalla out in the 14th round in 1924, so the contract promised a rare high-stakes sequel for the era. On December 14, 1925, Bates College held a cornerstone ceremony for a new athletic building with about 600 students watching. President Clifton D. Gray framed sports as training for clean minds and strong bodies, and the project was funded by a gift from William Bingham of Bethel. On December 3, 1925, a labor strike stopped grave digging at Catholic cemeteries, forcing funeral processions to wait by a public vault. It shows how one work dispute could freeze an entire city ritual, leaving bodies stored above ground until a deal was reached. On November 26, 1925, the Tupolev TB-1 made its first flight as the Soviet Union's first large, all-metal aircraft. Its corrugated metal skin and twin engines became a template for early Soviet long-range aviation, in the air and later as a transport. On November 23, 1925 in London, Mr. Perez showcased a new steel diving suit at the Olympia Shipping Exhibition, built from Stay-Brite stainless steel. It looks like a robot, but the heavy joints and helmet were designed to survive deep water pressure while keeping the diver dry. On November 20, 1925, the United States Army tested huge flash bombs to light the ground for night aerial photos near Rochester, New York. The bursts were so strong that buildings about 3,000 feet below shook, turning a camera experiment into a citywide scare. On November 17, 1957, police in Plainfield, Wisconsin, searched Ed Gaines' isolated farmhouse after a local shop owner went missing. The case shocked the nation and later inspired elements of films like Psycho and The Silence of the Lambs. This vintage Halloween costume uses a blank mask and loose gown to turn an ordinary room into a stage for pure mystery. Before store-bought latex became common, Many costumes were handmade from simple cloth and a single face cover, which is why they can look so eerie today. Around 1915, staff at the Wellcome Museum posed with ethnographic objects and human skulls, showing how museums once treated human remains as normal display pieces. Today, many institutions are returning such remains and sacred items to descendant communities, rewriting what collection is allowed to mean. A staged 1938 Warner Brothers photo shows a future U.S. president teaching a Hollywood star how to swim, long before politics changed his life. Studio bosses mocked the actress, but history flipped the script. The man in the swimsuit would one day run the world. Vienna, 1948, a juvenile prison cell holding a teenage sex worker officially classified as a minor offender. The warning on the door, "Venereal diseases are contagious," shows how post-war authorities treated exploited girls as biological threats, not victims. Hopi Nation, 1886. A Hopi girl with albinism photographed with other children of the tribe. In the 19th century, albino Native Americans were so rare that U.S. ethnographers documented them as biological anomalies rather than individuals. Mexico, 1939. Workers uncover a colossal Olmec stone head weighing over 20 tons, carved around 900–400 BCE. These monuments were shaped without metal tools or wheels and dragged for kilometers through jungle terrain. France, 1917. The German Zeppelin L-49 lies grounded after being shot down during World War I. Forced to land intact, it was later stripped for intelligence, giving the Allies direct access to Germany's most advanced airship technology. Spain, 1937. George Orwell holds a puppy while serving with the POUM militia during the Spanish Civil War. He was later shot through the throat on this front, an experience that directly shaped homage to Catalonia and his lifelong hatred of totalitarian propaganda. Early 1860s, Ulysses S. Grant is photographed using a metal posture brace hidden behind him. Long exposure times required subjects to be physically restrained, revealing how even presidents were literally immobilized by 19th century photography technology. Ethiopia, 1913. Emperor Menelik II, the African ruler who crushed Italy at the Battle of Adwa in 1896. This victory made Ethiopia the only African state to defeat a European colonial power and remain independent during the scramble for Africa. Missouri, 1920s, a class at a rural farm school where most children worked fields before and after lessons. Many attended only a few months a year, as agriculture still mattered more than formal education in much of rural America. Barcelona, 1906, the Sagrada Familia rises from open fields where livestock still grazed. Construction began in 1882 and has outlived its architect Antoni Gaudí by nearly a century, making it one of the longest-built structures in human history. New York, 1973. Paparazzo Ron Galella stalks Marlon Brando wearing a football helmet. Brando had previously punched him, breaking his jaw and knocking out 5 teeth. Galella kept shooting anyway and later won a court ruling allowing him to continue with distance limits. Barkerville, British Columbia, 1865. Miners assemble under armed escort before transporting gold from the Caribou goldfields. At its peak, Barkerville produced millions in gold and was one of the largest boomtowns in western North America. Lwów, 1924. Polish Jewish student Stanisław Steiger stands free after being falsely accused of attempting to assassinate Poland's president. His supporters forced the real attackers, the Ukrainian military organization, to publicly confess, collapsing one of interwar Poland's most explosive political frame-ups. 1954. Physicist Edward Teller proposed Sundial, a 10-gigaton hydrogen bomb, about 200x stronger than the Tsar Bomba. Theoretical models showed it could devastate an area the size of France or Texas, and the U.S. Air Force rejected it as militarily uncontrollable. Dijon, France, 1951. Local Catholic clergy organized the public hanging and burning of a Santa Claus effigy. The act was meant to denounce Santa as a pagan commercial symbol replacing Christian Christmas traditions. Australia, 1943. A soldier examines an unexploded 25-pound chemical gas shell while wearing a respirator. Thousands of live gas munitions were stockpiled and tested on Australian soil during Wartime, often handled manually despite the extreme risk. St. Louis, 1904. The Temple of Mirth at the World's Fair, an early funhouse built to disorient visitors with moving floors and visual illusions. It reflected how mass entertainment was shifting from education and progress displays to thrill-based amusement. Tennessee, 1940. A rural Appalachian funeral where neighbors, including dozens of children, gather around an open grave. In poor mountain communities, burials were public, unpaid, and handled almost entirely by family and neighbors due to the absence of funeral services. France, post-WWI, a banquet honoring les gueules cassées, soldiers who survived devastating facial injuries. Many underwent dozens of experimental reconstructive surgeries, helping to pioneer modern plastic and maxillofacial surgery. Lisbon, December 8, 1925. Crowds swarmed the Bank of Portugal to exchange forged notes from the Angola A Metrópole scam. The fraud involved legally printed but unauthorized banknotes and nearly collapsed Portugal's economy, helping trigger the 1926 military coup. November 22, 1925, the British submarine HMS M1 sank after colliding with the Swedish steamer Vidar, flooding in seconds. All 69 crew died, and the Admiralty ruled the civilian ship blameless after concluding the submarine was running silently and unseen. Turkey, November 25, 1925. Ataturk enforces the hat law, banning the fez and other traditional headgear. The law made Western hats mandatory for men and became a visible symbol of Turkey's forced secularization and break from the Ottoman past. Washington, D.C., November 24, 1925. City orphans gather outside the Ambassador Theater for a screening of Harold Lloyd's The Freshman. Movie studios regularly hosted orphaned children as publicity events, making early Hollywood both entertainment and social welfare spectacle.